Years later, Julian and Claire stood together under a bright morning sun, surrounded by laughter and applause. The grand opening of Claire's community library was finally here, a dream she had nurtured for years, now brought to life with Julian by her side. Children ran between shelves stacked high with colorful books, their faces glowing with excitement. Parents chatted happily, grateful for a space where their kids could learn and grow. It was everything Claire had hoped for, and more. As she looked around at the bustling crowd, Claire felt a surge of pride. This wasn't just a building filled with books. It was a sanctuary, a place where imagination could flourish and opportunities could bloom. And standing beside her, Julian beamed with equal pride, not because his name was engraved on the plaque near the entrance, but because he had played a role in making Claire's vision a reality. "You did it," Julian said softly, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Look at all these people. Look at what you've created." Claire leaned into him, smiling warmly. "We did it," she corrected gently. "I couldn't have done this without you." Julian shook his head, his voice tinged with humility. "No, Claire, you're the heart of this. I'm just lucky enough to be along for the ride." Their journey hadn't been easy. From the reckless bet that brought them together to the painful truths that nearly tore them apart, they had faced challenges most couples never would. But through every trial, they had grown, not just as individuals, but as partners. Julian had learned the value of authenticity, kindness, and unconditional love. Claire had discovered strength she didn't know she possessed, proving to herself and the world that she was worthy of respect and happiness. After the ribbon-cutting ceremony, friends and family gathered for speeches and refreshments. Marcus, Julian's old friend who had once mocked their marriage, approached them hesitantly. "Can I talk to you both for a moment?" he asked, looking unusually sheepish. Julian raised an eyebrow, curious. "Sure." Marcus cleared his throat, glancing at Claire before speaking. "I owe you both an apology. Back then, I thought this whole thing was a joke, a stupid bet. But seeing how far you've come, what you've built together, it made me realize how wrong I was. You two are proof that people can change, that love can overcome even the worst mistakes." Claire smiled kindly. "Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot." Julian nodded, extending his hand. Apology accepted. As the day wound down, Julian and Claire found themselves alone on a bench outside the library, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was cool, filled with the faint scent of blooming flowers. For a long while, neither spoke. They simply sat together, content in each other's presence. "I never imagined my life turning out like this," Julian admitted after a while, breaking the comfortable silence. "When I made that bet, I thought I was untouchable, invincible. I had no idea how much I still needed to learn, or how much you teach me." Claire rested her head on his shoulder, her smile soft but knowing. "And I never thought someone like you could see me the way you do now. Life has a funny way of surprising us." Julian chuckled, squeezing her hand. "Funny isn't the word I'd use. Miraculous, maybe." They sat there until the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, reflecting on how far they'd come. What started as a reckless dare had transformed into a profound love story, one rooted in forgiveness, growth, and unwavering commitment. Julian and Claire weren't perfect, but they were perfectly suited for each other, flaws and all. In the end, their journey proved one simple truth. Love isn't about finding someone who fits your expectations. It's about growing alongside someone, embracing imperfections, and building something extraordinary together. And as they walked hand in hand toward their future, Julian and Claire knew they had done exactly that. Months passed, and the once stormy seas of Julian and Claire's life began to calm. The tabloids moved on to fresher scandals, and the whispers in their small town softened into murmurs of admiration. People started noticing how Julian had changed, how he no longer flaunted his wealth or acted like the untouchable millionaire everyone once knew. Instead, he walked alongside Claire, genuinely invested in her passions and dreams. Together, they became a symbol of resilience, proving that even the most fractured relationships could be rebuilt with effort, patience, and love. Claire, too, had transformed. The quiet librarian who used to shrink into the background now stood tall, confident in her own skin. She embraced her role as a community leader, spearheading projects that brought people together. Her dream of opening a free library for underprivileged children was finally within reach, thanks in part to Julian's financial support, but more importantly, his belief in her vision. He didn't just write checks. He rolled up his sleeves, helping paint walls, organize bookshelves, and even read stories to kids during weekend events. Their bond deepened with every challenge they faced. They learned to communicate openly, sharing their fears and hopes without reservation. Julian discovered the joy of simplicity, the comfort of sitting by the fireplace with Claire, talking about nothing and everything. Claire, in turn, realized she didn't need to change herself to fit into Julian's world. Instead, he adapted to hers, finding beauty in the ordinary moments she cherished. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Julian turned to Claire with a thoughtful expression. "Do you remember when we first met?" he asked, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. Claire smiled softly. "How could I forget? You were so out of place in the library, pretending to browse books while sneaking glances at me." Julian chuckled, shaking his head. "I wasn't pretending. I really did want to know more about you. Though I'll admit, my reasons back then weren't exactly noble." Claire raised an eyebrow playfully, understatement of the year. They both laughed, the sound warm and genuine. For a moment, there was no trace of the pain or betrayal that had once defined their relationship. Just two people who had grown closer through adversity. "I've been thinking," Julian continued, his tone turning serious. "We've come so far since then. We've built something real, something worth fighting for. But I don't want us to ever forget where we started, or how hard we worked to get here. I think it's time we renewed our vows." Claire blinked, caught off guard. "Renew our vows?" "Yes," Julian said, taking her hand in his. "Not because we need to prove anything to anyone else, but because I want to remind myself, and you, of what we mean to each other. This isn't just about fixing what went wrong. It's about celebrating what we've created together." Tears welled up in Claire's eyes as she nodded. "I'd like that," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The ceremony was simple yet deeply meaningful, a stark contrast to their extravagant wedding months earlier. Surrounded by close friends, family, and members of the community they touched, Julian and Claire exchanged heartfelt promises. This time, there were no secrets, no ulterior motives. Just two people committing to a future rooted in honesty, respect, and unwavering devotion. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, Julian felt a profound sense of gratitude. What had begun as a reckless dare had evolved into a partnership unlike any he'd imagined. And Claire, standing beside him, knew she had found not just a husband, but a true partner who saw her for who she was and loved her all the more for it. The tabloid headlines hit like a tidal wave, splashed across newspapers and social media feeds. "Millionaire's cruel bet," "Wife humiliated," screamed one article, while another read, "Love or lies." The truth behind Julian Hartley's shocking marriage. Overnight, Julian and Claire became the center of unwanted attention. People dissected their relationship, speculating about Claire's motives and mocking Julian's supposed arrogance. Comment sections were flooded with harsh words, some calling Claire naive, others labeling Julian heartless. For Claire, it was overwhelming. She had always lived quietly, avoiding drama and keeping to herself. Now strangers felt entitled to judge her choices, questioning why she stayed with someone who had hurt her so deeply. Friends from the community stopped meeting her eyes when they passed on the street, unsure whether to offer support or distance themselves. Even her favorite coffee shop felt different. Whispers followed her whenever she walked in. Julian, too, felt the weight of public scrutiny, but for him, it was guilt that stung the most. He hated seeing Claire endure this backlash, knowing it was entirely his fault. Every cruel comment directed at her felt like a punch to the gut. Determined to protect her, he called a press conference to address the scandal head-on. Standing in front of cameras, Julian admitted everything: the bet, his initial intentions, and how wrong he had been. "I don't expect anyone to forgive me," he said, his voice steady but filled with remorse. "What I did was selfish and immature. But what started as a mistake turned into something real. For me, at least. Claire didn't deserve any of this, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it right." His confession shocked the public. Some dismissed it as damage control, while others admired his honesty. But Claire wasn't convinced. When Julian returned home that evening, she confronted him again. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Is it because you feel guilty? Or is it just another way to save face?" Julian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I won't lie. I feel terrible about what's happening to you. But that's not why I'm fighting for us, Claire. I'm doing this because losing you would mean losing the best thing that's ever happened to me. You've changed me in ways I didn't think were possible. I'm not asking you to forgive me overnight, or even at all. But I need you to know that I love you. Truly." Claire wanted to believe him, but doubt still lingered. To give her space, Julian offered an ultimatum. "If you want to leave, I'll understand. I'll step aside and let you rebuild your life without me. But if there's even a small part of you that thinks we can make this work, I'll fight for us, with everything I have." To his surprise, Claire shook her head firmly. "No," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I'm not walking away. Not now. We've both come too far to give up." Her decision stunned Julian and gave him hope. Together, they decided to weather the storm side by side. They stopped reading articles or scrolling through social media, focusing instead on strengthening their bond. Julian continued supporting Claire's charity work, using his influence to amplify her efforts rather than overshadow them. Slowly, the negative chatter began to fade, replaced by admiration for Claire's resilience and Julian's transformation. Through shared adversity, they learned to lean on each other, not as two halves of a broken relationship, but as equals determined to build something stronger. Their struggles weren't over, but they faced them together, proving that love could survive even the harshest storms. The days that followed were some of the hardest Julian had ever faced. Claire avoided him as much as possible, retreating into herself and throwing all her energy into her charity work. She barely spoke to him except for short, polite exchanges about logistics, groceries, bills, or schedules. The warmth she used to radiate around him was gone, replaced by a cold distance that made the mansion feel emptier than ever. Julian knew he had messed up in ways words couldn't fix, but he also knew he couldn't let things end like this. He had hurt Claire deeply, but walking away wasn't an option, not when he finally understood what she meant to him. For the first time in his life, Julian decided to fight for something real. And so he began making changes, not grand gestures, but small, consistent efforts to show Claire he was serious about earning back her trust. He started by joining her at the community center where she volunteered. At first, Claire was skeptical, assuming he was only there out of obligation. But Julian didn't complain when asked to help sort donations or organize bookshelves. He listened intently as she explained her vision for expanding literacy programs, offering practical advice on fundraising and logistics. Over time, Claire began to see glimpses of sincerity in his actions. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One afternoon, while they were packing boxes of books for a school donation drive, Julian turned to Claire and said softly, "I want you to know I'm not doing this because I have to. I'm here because I believe in what you're trying to do, and because I want to be part of your world." Claire hesitated, unsure how to respond. She wanted to believe him, but fear held her back. "Why should I trust you?" she asked finally, her voice trembling. "How do I know this isn't another act?" Julian met her gaze, his expression serious. "You don't," he admitted honestly. "And I can't blame you for doubting me after everything I've done. All I can do is prove it to you, day by day, step by step. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm willing to spend the rest of my life trying to earn it." His vulnerability caught her off guard. For months, Claire had been shielding her heart, afraid to let Julian in again. But seeing him put aside his pride, working alongside her without expecting anything in return, made her realize he was genuinely trying to change. Still, forgiveness wasn't easy. It came in waves, moments of hope followed by lingering doubts. To rebuild their connection, Julian suggested they start fresh. They spent evenings talking about their dreams and fears, sharing stories they'd never told anyone else. Claire opened up about growing up feeling invisible, always hiding behind books, because she thought no one would notice her otherwise. Julian confessed how lonely wealth and success had made him, revealing the pressure he felt to constantly prove himself to others. Slowly, their conversations became less guarded, more honest. Julian learned to appreciate the quiet strength Claire carried within her, while Claire discovered layers of kindness and vulnerability in Julian that she hadn't seen before. Though the scars of betrayal remained, they began to heal together, one fragile moment at a time. But just as things started improving, new challenges arose. Tabloids somehow caught wind of Julian's initial bet, publishing sensational headlines that painted Claire as a victim and Julian as a manipulative playboy. Public opinion turned against them overnight, with strangers criticizing Claire for staying with someone who had treated her so poorly. Faced with external judgment and renewed scrutiny, Julian and Claire had to decide whether their bond was strong enough to withstand the storm, or if the cracks between them would widen once again. As the months passed, Claire and Julian settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Claire continued her charity work, pouring her energy into helping others, while Julian threw himself into his business, using work as an excuse to avoid confronting the growing unease inside him. But no matter how busy they kept themselves, small tensions began to creep into their marriage. Julian's behavior became harder to ignore. At social events, he seemed distant, avoiding introducing Claire to his friends or standing beside her when people stared and whispered. Claire noticed but chose to brush it off, telling herself that Julian was just uncomfortable in large crowds. After all, he had always been private about his personal life, even before they were married. But deep down, doubt lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. One evening, Julian invited Claire to join him at a dinner party hosted by one of his closest friends, Marcus. It was supposed to be a low-key gathering, nothing extravagant. Claire agreed, excited to finally meet some of Julian's inner circle. She spent hours preparing, choosing an elegant dress, and carefully styling her hair, wanting to make a good impression. When they arrived, the atmosphere was warm, at least on the surface. Julian introduced Claire briefly before excusing himself to mingle with the other guests. Left alone, Claire tried to engage in conversation, but the polite smiles and forced laughter made her feel out of place. She overheard snippets of hushed conversations as she moved through the room, comments about Julian's surprising choice and how long this will last. Each word felt like a dagger, cutting deeper than she cared to admit. Then, while refilling her drink at the bar, Claire accidentally stumbled upon a group of men, including Marcus, laughing uproariously near the balcony doors. Curious, she paused for a moment, hidden behind a potted plant. That's when she heard it. "Can you believe he actually went through with it?" Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "I thought he'd chicken out after a week." Another man chimed in. "Honestly, I still don't get it. What's in it for him?" "A bet." The blood drained from Claire's face as the pieces fell into place. The rushed proposal, Julian's sudden interest in her, his strange behavior at social events. It all made sense now. Her heart sank, each beat heavy with betrayal. She wanted to storm out, to scream at Julian and demand answers. But instead, she stood frozen, tears welling up in her eyes. By the time Julian found her, Claire was sitting quietly on a bench outside, staring blankly at the stars. He could tell something was wrong immediately. "Claire," he asked cautiously, sitting beside her. "What's the matter?" She turned to look at him, her voice trembling. "Was it all a game to you, Julian? Was I just a bet?" Julian froze, his stomach twisting into knots. He opened his mouth to deny it, to come up with some clever lie, but the truth hung between them like a wall. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "It started as a stupid dare. But Claire, I swear, it's not like that anymore. I never meant for things to go this far." His words hit her like a punch to the chest. "You lied to me," she said, her voice breaking. "From the very beginning, you lied. How am I supposed to trust anything you say now?" Julian reached for her hand, desperate to explain, but she pulled away, standing abruptly. "Don't touch me," she whispered, her voice raw with pain. "I need time to think." That night, as they lay in separate bedrooms, the silence between them was deafening. Julian replayed their conversation over and over in his mind, guilt eating away at him. He had hurt Claire in ways he couldn't undo, and the thought of losing her terrified him. For the first time in his life, Julian realized that winning wasn't enough, not if it cost him the one person who truly mattered. The day after their wedding, Claire stepped into Julian's sprawling mansion for the first time as his wife. The grandeur of the place was overwhelming. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and sweeping staircases that seemed straight out of a movie. But despite its beauty, the house felt cold and impersonal, like a museum rather than a home. Claire took a deep breath, reminding herself that this was her new life now. She was determined to make the best of it. Julian, on the other hand, wasn't sure what to expect. He had always lived alone, surrounded by luxury but devoid of warmth. Having Claire in his space was different. At first, he found her presence slightly inconvenient. She moved around the house quietly, tidying up things he hadn't even noticed were messy. She cooked meals from scratch, filling the air with aromas of garlic, herbs, and freshly baked bread. Slowly, the sterile mansion began to feel less like a showroom and more like a home. But while Claire threw herself into creating a cozy environment, she couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. Everything about her life now, the expensive furniture, the designer clothes Julian insisted she wear, the chauffeur-driven car, felt foreign. She missed her simple routine at the library, where she could lose herself among books without worrying about fitting into someone else's world. Despite her struggles, Claire refused to let self-doubt consume her. She started volunteering at local charities, organizing book drives and literacy programs for underprivileged children. It gave her a sense of purpose and allowed her to stay connected to the community she loved. When Julian asked why she spent so much time helping others, she smiled softly and said, "Books changed my life. I want to give that gift to someone else." As weeks turned into months, Julian began noticing changes, not just in the house, but in himself. For the first time in years, he looked forward to coming home. There was something comforting about finding Claire curled up on the couch with a book or hearing her hum softly as she worked in the kitchen. Her kindness and authenticity stood in stark contrast to the superficial relationships he'd grown accustomed to. He found himself opening up to her in ways he never had with anyone else, sharing stories from his childhood and talking about his fears of failure. One evening, as they sat together on the terrace watching the sunset, Julian realized how much lighter he felt around Claire. She didn't care about his money or status. She simply accepted him for who he was. That realization should have brought him peace, but instead, it filled him with unease. Because deep down, he knew the truth. He didn't deserve her trust or affection. Their marriage was built on lies, and every moment they shared felt like borrowed time. Still, Julian couldn't bring himself to confess. Instead, he buried his guilt, telling himself that Claire was happy and that was all that mattered. What he didn't realize was that happiness built on deception could only last so long before cracks began to show. And when those cracks appeared, They would change everything. For both of them. Julian Hartley was the kind of man people either admired or envied. With his tailored suits, flashy cars, and a bank account that seemed endless, he floated through life like he owned it. His charm was unmatched, his confidence magnetic, and his arrogance, well, that was something else entirely. Julian wasn't just rich, he was untouchable asterisk, or so he thought. One Friday night, Julian found himself at an upscale club in the heart of the city. The air buzzed with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses filled with overpriced champagne. He sat at a VIP table surrounded by his closest friends, people who were as wealthy and carefree as he was. They joked about their latest business deals, bragged about their romantic escapades, and generally acted like they were untethered from reality. But as the night wore on, the conversation took a turn. Julian, one of his friends, slurred after downing another shot. "You've dated supermodels, actresses, even royalty. What's left for you? Is there anyone you can't get?" The group erupted into laughter, but Julian smirked. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "There's no such thing as can't for me," he said coolly. "You name it, I'll do it." "Oh yeah." Another friend chimed in, clearly enjoying the challenge. What if we dare you to marry someone totally out of your league? And I don't mean socially, I mean physically." The room went quiet for a moment before bursting into raucous laughter. Everyone thought it was a joke, a ridiculous hypothetical meant to entertain them for a few minutes. But Julian didn't laugh. Instead, his sharp eyes narrowed slightly, and a slight grin spread across his face. "You're serious?" Julian asked, leaning forward now, intrigued by the absurdity of it all. "Dead serious," his friend replied, still chuckling. "Find someone who looks nothing like your usual type, marry her, and prove us wrong." For a brief second, Julian hesitated. Marrying someone just to win a bet. It sounded insane, even for him. But then again, when had Julian ever backed down from a challenge? Besides, this would be easy. He could pick anyone, someone ordinary, unremarkable, and make it work long enough to collect his winnings. After all, how hard could it really be? His mind wandered until it landed on Claire Bennett. She was the town librarian, soft-spoken and gentle, with a figure that society might label plus-sized. Julian had seen her around occasionally. She always carried a stack of books, her curly hair tied up in a messy bun, completely oblivious to the world around her. To Julian, she represented everything opposite of his glamorous lifestyle. "Perfect. I'll do it," Julian announced suddenly, cutting through the noise. His friends froze, staring at him in disbelief. "You're not serious," one of them said, laughing nervously. "Watch me," Julian shot back, raising his glass in a toast. "By this time next month, I'll be engaged to Claire Bennett." His friends roared with laughter, certain he wouldn't follow through. But Julian wasn't joking. As far as he was concerned, this was going to be the easiest and most entertaining bet of his life. Little did he know, it would change everything. The next morning, Julian woke up with a pounding headache and a vague memory of the previous night's events. As he sipped his coffee on the balcony of his penthouse apartment, the absurd dare replayed in his mind. Marrying Claire Bennett. It had seemed like such a laughable idea at the time. A quick way to prove a point and collect some bragging rights. But now, in the sober light of day, it felt intriguing. Julian wasn't one to back down from anything, especially not something as ridiculous as this. He decided to move forward with the plan, convincing himself it would be nothing more than a harmless game. After all, how difficult could it be to charm someone like Claire? She was kind, unassuming, and clearly not used to attention from men like him. This wouldn't just be easy, it would be fun. He started visiting the library where Claire worked, pretending to browse through books while secretly observing her. At first, she barely noticed him, too busy helping children pick out stories or shelving returned novels. But Julian was patient. He began striking up conversations, asking for book recommendations, and complimenting her taste in literature. Slowly but surely, Claire warmed up to him. Claire found Julian's presence both surprising and flattering. No one like him had ever shown interest in her before. Tall, handsome, and dripping with confidence, he seemed almost unreal. Yet there was something about the way he spoke to her, genuine curiosity mixed with light-hearted humor, that made her feel special. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Over weeks of casual meetings, Julian spun a carefully crafted story. He told Claire that he was tired of shallow relationships and wanted something deeper, more meaningful. He painted himself as a man searching for authenticity in a world obsessed with appearances. Claire, touched by his words, began to believe him. One evening, after they'd spent hours talking about their dreams and fears, Julian took a deep breath and said, "Claire, I know we come from different worlds, but being around you makes me feel grounded. Would you consider giving us a chance? A real future together?" Claire hesitated. The idea of marrying Julian felt surreal, even reckless. Could someone like him truly fall for someone like her? Still, she couldn't deny the connection they shared, or the way her heart raced whenever he smiled at her. Against her better judgment, she agreed. Their engagement shocked everyone in town. Friends and acquaintances whispered behind closed doors, speculating about what Julian saw in Claire. Some thought it was a publicity stunt. Others assumed he was going through some sort of midlife crisis. Only Julian's closest friends knew the truth, and they couldn't stop laughing about it. As preparations for the wedding began, Julian tried to ignore the gnawing guilt in the pit of his stomach. He told himself this was all part of the game, a temporary arrangement meant to serve a purpose. But the more time he spent with Claire, the harder it became to remember why he'd started this charade in the first place. For Claire, the whirlwind romance was both thrilling and overwhelming. She threw herself into planning their life together, determined to make it work despite the doubts creeping into her mind. Little did either of them know, their journey was only beginning, and the stakes were higher than either could have imagined.